Thanks, Anjali. So, in fact, while preparing for this webinar, I realized that yesterday marked exactly 3 months since the start of the conflict, which started on 28th Feb. So, in that sense, this webinar is quite timely. 3 months into the conflict, we're also able to better see the impacts of the war across various sectors. And this is the context of the discussion today as well. We want to be able to see and understand what are the broader macroeconomic implications of disruptions to trade across three major sectors. And we will be looking at the energy sector, the agriculture sector, as well as the defense sector. Um, Given that the current status of negotiations is tentative and there is an ongoing US blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, it's hard to say if there is a possible end in sight. So we are hoping that this conversation would help us better understand what the current as well as the long-term implications of this war are, especially in the context of India. Um, Look at to what extent India has trade linkages with the region, and also finally look at how these shifts are translating into everyday impacts and the lives and livelihoods of people. So that is the broader context of why we're having this webinar. And for the discussion today, we are joined by Professor Dinesh Abrol. Dinesh ji is a professor at the Institute of Studies in Industrial Development. He's also a visiting professor at Center of Science and Policy in JNU. He has been for decades associated with various farmer movements and is also a member of the Delhi Science Forum as well as the All India People Science Network. And today he will be speaking on the implications of the war on the fertilizer and agriculture sector. We are also joined by Siddharth Chakravarty. Siddharth is a researcher working on the maritime trade of energy commodities. His ongoing work focuses on strategies from below to challenge complicity in the context of war and genocide. And in today's webinar, he will be speaking about the growing closeness between fossil fuels and military industries, as well as international alliances which have domestic consequences. We were also supposed to be joined by Mr. Subhash Chandra Garg, who was to discuss the impact of the war on India's energy sector. However, due to a last minute emergency, he won't be able to join. But we were able to record a short conversation with him in the morning. So through the course of this webinar, we'll also be playing that. About Subhash ji, he has been part of the IAS for 36 years, and he's also served as a secretary for economic affairs, finance, and also as a power secretary for the government of India. He now works as a freelance policy strategist on economy, finance, and fiscal affairs. So these are our three speakers for today, and we are very grateful that they could make the time to be here. So thank you very much. Um, Before we begin the program and I hand over to Dinesh ji, I just wanted to say the format for the program, which is that I will first be inviting each of the speakers one by one to give us their opening remarks for about 10 minutes, after which we'll open up the floor for discussion, responses, as well as questions from the audience. So if the audience has any questions, could you please put them in the chat box and we will be taking it up in the later half of the discussion. So with that, I would like to invite Dinesh ji to present on what has been the impact of the war on the fertilizer and agriculture sector, where he will be speaking on the import dependence of fertilizer, current strategies of the government, and of course, most importantly, what is the impact on farmers and people. So thank you, Dinesh ji. Over to you.
Thank you, Asmi. Thank you, Joe and CFA. See, India has been dependent on imported feedstocks for fertilizer production for quite some time. In fact, we shifted to imports almost 3 decades ago. And fossil fuel-based feedstocks have been in use for the production of fertilizers like urea in private and public sector. Even for potash and phosphorus, we are completely dependent on imports from outside. 70% of fossil fuels are used in material transformation. Fertilizer is a material that we use, which is dependent on fossil fuel. There are various other materials like plastics and agrochemicals, pharmaceuticals. We use them for a variety of purposes. But this fertilizer, has it been playing an important role in the story of Indian agriculture, always has generated, interest in the farmers and elsewhere within the citizens. So I'm glad that we are discussing fertilizer as well. See, the consequences of disruption in supplies are obvious. We have been, our infrastructure is vulnerable, our material production is vulnerable to disruption in supplies. There are higher financial costs of foreign exchange outflows, and I'll give details of that. Subsidy burden is on the rise. There's a reluctance of corporates to invest in sustainable technological innovation required for the development of fertilizer sector in a structurally sustainable way. Uh, Liberalization, privatization, globalization as a path was chosen by the ruling elites in the 90s, as you know that. By then, the older units also, some of one which was set up around 70s, and they had become technically and financially unviable in many ways. Uh, uh, yeah, thanks, Asmi. Yeah, we can move to the next slide, please. Yeah. So I was just outlining what I've indicated in the very first slide, that liberalization, privatization, globalization was chosen by the ruling elites, and but though they are not paying the cost of loss of energy independence or for material production, it is the people who are paying this price, and Indian agriculture and farmers are paying the price. Actually, war is bringing home the obvious and expected disastrous outcome of dependence. Economic reforms of 1990s pursued as cost competitiveness totally ignored systemic and structural dimensions, and democratic features of development were abundant. We can get into the details of that, what all features. But one of the feature was that we had public sector earlier, and we were dependent not on imported. These are all democratic features because that left national autonomy. But liberalization, privatization, globalization derailed plurality and diversity of the Indian capitalist path as such, and which was earlier impacted by the core values or influenced by the core values of decolonization. We abandoned that from the 90s, and the result is we were on the path of neo-colonial economic development. During the liberalization, privatization, globalization path, the ruling elite succeeded in moving the nation away from the path of self-reliance. India embraced the projected thinking that fertilizer, like any other commodity, can be, imported at lower rates from countries where it is produced cheaply rather than producing it in the country at a higher cost. So, neo-colonial agenda got a big boost even in respect of technology development, and we began to, consider that technology can be imported, which was not possible, and that didn't happen. India ended up moving without government investment in the sector of fertilizer production and started depending on the private sector. And the steering and coordination in the sector of energy and material transformation got weakened hugely. Import dependent fossilization of agriculture. Harish Damodran wrote yesterday how the fossilization of agriculture has been emerging as far as concerned. But it's a consequence of the adoption of imaginaries of very slavish, imitative approach to agricultural development. That's also the reason. Import dependence also meant no more South-South collective self-reliance of global South, and India embraced what I would call trade-driven development. Trade is necessary, but the development doesn't need to be driven by trade. It should be developed by basic needs, situation assessment, which I undertake now in the next few minutes, would indicate, and if we move to the next slide, Asmi, please. The next slide, yeah. Uh, See, if you look at the dependency on imported natural gas and naphtha and so on, etc., it has been straining India's finances for very, very long. Wars only have, whether it was the Ukraine-Russia conflict or whether it is the recent conflict, have added to the woes and it only strengthens the case of self-reliance. India's fertilizer import bill is projected to reach a record 18 billion for the fiscal year ending March 2026, a 76% increase from the previous year. Import costs and price surges are being experienced. In April 2026, urea import prices nearly doubled to 935 to 959 range per ton dollars compared to the approximately $508 per ton in early 2024. Feedstock outflows. Feedstock is imported. Sometimes fertilizer also is imported, but feedstock is also imported. Locally produced urea relies on imported liquefied natural gas, LNG, for roughly 80 to 90% of its production costs. So obviously, impact would be there on the cost of fertilizer. So, and we've been largely importing LNG from Qatar, the US, and the UAE, making the domestic area prices, urea prices, highly sensitive to global energy market fluctuations and disruptions. Currency impact also has been felt. The massive dollar outflow for fertilizers and LNG has contributed to the weakening of the Indian rupee, further inflating the cost of subsequent imports. Let's move to the next slide, please. Yeah. Yeah. So if you look at the subsidy burden, which has been, constantly the point of discussion among economists, and Dr. Ashok Gulati has been writing continuously on this issue, wanting to deregulate the prices. He's written again in April, I think, based on a study completed in March, that how we can de-risk it. And in that, he's proposing the price to be deregulated. Currently, the retail price of urea remains fixed at approximately rupees 267 per 45 kg bag, even though the actual cost to the government is roughly 2,200 per bag. To maintain stable prices of fertilizer for farmers, the governments, and not only this government, the previous government, have absorbed the difference between high import dash production costs and the fixed maximum retail price. Calls for price deregulation, I already indicated, are from the neoliberal Europe group. Growing fiscal burden. The total fertilizer subsidy for financial year 2026 is projected at 1.86 lakh crore, approximately $20.2 billion, with urea alone accounting for 1.26 lakh crore. Let me indicate to you that, in fact, in the 2022 in 3, it had crossed 2.5 lakh crore as the burden. So it's fluctuating. It's been higher, in fact, even prior to this particular war, the blockage of the Strait of Hormuz. And if we compare it, the subsidy has ballooned from 73,067 crore in 2014 to nearly triple of the amount in the current year 2025-26 period. If we want to conclude out of it, are we really moving forward in appropriate directions even after 2014? Answer is no. Trade implications of the war have become or even geopolitical developments have become, an alibi for the government to write all kinds of FTAs on which agriculture will be open to US or to UK or to EU or to New Zealand is the latest FTA. And they say this is a de-risking strategy and this is diverging. But basically, you're also impacting on agriculture. We should not forget that. The corporate-led strategy and agriculture paving way for anti-people, trade-driven development strategy, I think, should be a matter of concern. India should not pursue this particular path. India is becoming a junior partner to the United States. We have seen that, and as a result, even a friend like Iran, we did not even condemn the death of the Ayatollah. The Tina syndrome should be contested. Government has been arguing that there is no choice. We have to enter into strategic alliances with Quad countries and so on, etc., because our rival is China. Limits of such a path. Already we have seen during the liberalization, privatization, globalization, we did open ourselves to the rest of the world, but our exports did not increase, our imports increased, and as a result, we are seeing the consequences of it. Our even foreign exchange reserves are not really very comfortable. Parliament and people need to discuss self-reliance and de-risking in terms of how and why. Viksit Bharat needs to be deep unmasked. We will discuss what kind of alternate path of development is actually needed, and the trade-driven economic energy and technical development cannot be the India's future path. Let me move to the next part of the thing. What is the status of current domestic production? Asmi, can we move to the slides in part two? Yeah. Uh, uh, See, if you look at with regard to this particular path, as I indicated in my introductory slide, that import dependence cannot be our path. Energy independence is critical to, and how actually we have tackled in the recent period the challenge of domestic production of fertilizer is indicated in these particular slides. In 2016, the decision was taken to rebuild 5 brownfield urea plants with a total output of 6.35 million of urea per year with natural gas as feedstock. And we've been importing liquefied natural gas. With an investment of rupees 40,000 crore. Each plant holds a capacity of 12.7 lakh metric tons of urea. Ramagundam, Gorakhpur, Sindri, and Barauni have been decommissioned on this basis, but import dependence on the feedstock, is having consequences. It makes us vulnerable. It's very clear that the costs increase. Sindri fertilizer plant, which is in Dhanbad in Jharkhand, in operations began on November 5, 2022, reviving the FCIL. And here K.R. Chakravarty used to work, the father of Indian fertilizer technology. We were totally independent with regard to fertilizer technology development because of some of the efforts which were made in FPDIL. There's a long story of how FPDIL was killed, and I won't get into the details of that. The Barauni fertilizer plant operations began on October 18, 2022, reviving the Hindustan Fertilizer Corporation Limited. Plants are state-of-the-art gas-based, but they're dependent on imports. Aimed at making India self-reliant in urea, but still import dependence as far as feedstock is concerned. Scaling up, scaling out, scaling deep in agriculture need to be planned, and I'll come to that, what kind of strategy is possible in order to ensure nutrients for our soils. And when we mine every year, we produce crops, soils do lose, nutrients, and we have got to refurnish them. And how do we do that? What kind of strategy can be done? How do we broaden, deepen, and widen our strategy with regard to fertilization? We will come in part 3. Technological self-reliance needs to be conceptualized as a strategy of balanced energy development, which include coal gasification as one component. I would come to the details of what kind of effort which was required in coal gasification, how that got weakened in the liberalization, privatization, globalization 1990s. In fact, I used to visit the Central Fuel Research Institute and PDIL Sindri very often during that particular period, and we used to be very concerned about it, the way the technology development was being weakened. Revitalizing six units did take place, and our production rose from 22.5 million tons in 14-15 to 31.4 million MT, but remains dependent on imported feedstock. The public sector units operated on these locations earlier on. On account of the loss of technical and financial viability of the plants, they were closed down in the early 2000, and plans were put for revival. The rehabilitation of four major urea plants have already indicated. And there is a strategic stocking also policy as far as is concerned. In our buffer stocks have been maintained to an extent of 18 million ton, a 36% increase over the previous year. Feedstock priority under the Natural Gas Supply Regulation Order 2026, the government has mandated that at least 70% of domestic gas be prioritized for fertilizer plants. So domestic gas, has to be relied upon, and domestic gas is not sufficient. But this does require, that even gas needs to be explored locally as far as concerned. After all, we went into offshore exploration of gas. We did find gas. We found gas in several basins in Andhra and Telangana and other areas, but we handed over to Ambanis and others who really made a mess of it. Now let me come to Talcher Fertilizer Limited as a project. In this, it was a joint venture of Gas Authority of India Limited, CIL, Rashtriya Chemical Fertilizer, and FCIL. It's a large-scale coal gasification plant-based urea plant has been conceived. Its current status is that it's complete only to the extent of 71%. Recent reviews in April 2026 confirmed that work is still at advanced stage, with critical components like the 220 kV power line still experienced to be ready by December 2026 only. The plant is now scheduled to become fully operational by December 2006. The delays have occurred. The project missed its original 2023 deadline due to challenges with the Chinese contractor, the Wuhan Engineering. We've been dependent on, because FPDI was a very important contractor. In fact, we killed it, and we have had to depend on Chinese contractors, Wuhan Engineering. EIL, the Engineers India Limited, was a very important contributor to the engineering, and these were enterprises which we built during the 1950 to 1990s. And but we didn't protect them, we did not nurture them, and the consequences there. COVID-19 related visa issues and geopolitical tensions with China continue to affect Wuhan Engineering. Capacity, once finished, it will produce this Talcher plant will metric tons of urea annually using indigenous coals. Indian coals do have high ash, and they do pose a problem. And as a result, technology also development is a challenge. National Coal Gasification Mission aims to gasify 100 million ton of coal annually by 2030 to reduce reliance on imported natural gas, methanol and fertilizer, and ammonia and so on, etc. Projects are in the implementation phase under a 8,500 crore incentive scheme. A lot of private sector actors have been attracted, and they have to be given incentive. And they keep criticizing, saying this incentive is not enough. Even 3 days ago, there was a story on coal gasification in one of the English newspapers. I saw that somebody had interviewed these companies and found that they are, saying this incentive is not enough. Talcher fertilizer plants, often called the lighthouse project, in India's first large-scale coal gasification unit. 71% complete, December 2000 completed, the story which I already mentioned. If you look at few more stories, but let me go to the underground coal gasification project. There's another important project where indigenous technology is involved, and a new project at Lakhanpur, Odisha is utilizing BHEL indigenous high ash coal gasification technology, a critical step in using India's coal quality. Let's move to the next slide. So realistic targets in coal gasification are almost half of what actually were planned. 50, 60 MTPA is a more realistic midterm achievement, though in talk of 100 MTPA gasification, but it will not happen. Import substitution to slash the current 243 million ton of coal imports by 2036 through domestic augmentation and gasification is being thought of. The escalating West Asia conflict has increased the urgency for these projects to provide geopolitical insurance against fuel and fertilizer price shocks. If we go to the next slide, please, where I have described the current challenges of fertilizer industry. Asmi, can we move to the next slide? Oh yeah, we have moved. Yeah, thanks. India is the second largest fertilizer consuming country, the third largest producer, and the world's largest importer of fertilizer materials. It's an important, feature to be kept in mind. On average, consumption is increasing by around 4 to 5% every year. In the context of imports becoming dearer, costlier on account of the war and the pandemic, a renewed strategy was needed and is needed to ensure plant nutrients to the farmers. Putting up more plants based on conventional technology may also hamper the decarbonization agenda of the country. So one has to see that we don't put all eggs in one basket. We really balance technologies, and I think balanced energy development pathway is the way forward. Optimal production and realization of full capacity utilization in these plants must happen. Capacity utilization has been in the past very poor in some of these fertilizer plants, and many a time for various reasons, including imported feedstock. And the technologies also have to be constantly worked upon, as I said, diligent use based on the strategy of 4R, which is recycle and so on. Nutrient stewardship with a focus on better nutrient and efficiency, zero wastage should become inevitable. And for that reason, we need a fertilizer application to be treated as a service and not fertilizer being sold and then farmers being expected to apply in a manner that they don't waste it. That's been a common challenge with regard to the soil health, that the balanced use of fertilizers is not there. And that's been the critique. So the solution exists. But are we moving towards that particular solution? Let's move to the next slide. I will indicate to you why we are not able to. Current challenges of the public sector is one point which I want to make before I move actually to the fertilizer usage challenge as far as it's concerned. Asmi, you tell me if I have to, wherever stop, I will wait for your current challenges of the public sector.
Dinesh, 1 second, since you have said this, I was wondering if part three, which is your pathways forward, we could do after everyone does their 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Or
So part three we will do. Part three we will do afterwards. Let me close on these
yeah,
challenges. There are three
sure.
more slides on that. I won't take very long. And this, as far as this slides are concerned, they can be shared. There's no issue. Disinvestment in fertilizer has been hanging, as a Damocles sword. In the People's Commission on Public Sector and Public Services, we have actually considered and issued earlier statements also on that. Dr. M.P. Sukumaran, who was actually a CEO, is a member of the fertilizer corporation, Cochin and Travancore. He's a member of the Public Sector People's Commission, and earlier, with his help, we had prepared this statement as well. So the government of India unfortunately classified fertilizer as a non-strategic sector. But today we realize actually it's a strategic sector. Its strategic importance is there. Agriculture does have a strategic importance. There's no doubt about it. We can't depend on food imports. PSUs can't be put on sale. At the moment, that Damocles sword is still hanging. Past experience is not so encouraging with the private sector, such as Tata's and Birla. They have left the scene after selling their assets to others. Those have become standard assets. The probability of the profitability of the fertilizer business in India depends heavily on the subsidy administration, and private players continuously ask for more benefits as far as is concerned. Let me move to the next slide, and public sector can be discussed. I'll come to the fertilizer use point. In October 22, Modi government launched an initiative through Department of Fertilizer called One Nation, One Fertilizer. They wanted to debrand. They wanted only one brand, and everywhere there was also the Prime Minister photograph. And they started calling everything as Bharat Urea, Bharat DAP, Bharat NPK, Bharat, potash. Their stated intent was to reduce the logistic cost involved in the transportation of fertilizer by inhibiting the crisscross movement of fertilizer across the country. But in fact, what they have done is that they have put all the soil testing services as well as fertilizer sales through these private chains as well as other cooperative even being used, in one entity. And as a result, fertilizer use is not actually taking place in a scientific manner. And this control is passing on into the hands of the corporates. If you, I have actually done a paper earlier on this, which can be also shared. So the way the fertilizer application should be treated as a public service, because we need to ensure that there is no wastage and there is a soil health improvement actually, because our soils are degraded and we do need to continuously maintain scientific use of organic and inorganic fertilizer use. And at the moment, one cannot expect from these corporate controlled sources that they will actually go for scientific application. If past experience doesn't show, we just did a study of Karnal, Panipat area, which is a core area for green revolution agriculture, and we found that unscientific imbalanced use of fertilizer and agrochemical was a very common problem. Biofertilizer discussion began only if you just next slide, please, Asmi, and that's the last slide in this particular part. A roadmap has been opened for upcoming Kharif season by Dr. M.L. Jat, ICR Director General, who used to be part of the Natural Resources Division, and people who know natural resources. He even was working with IFS and so on, etc. But many of these people now, are thinking late that how to actually move on increased adoption of biofertilizer. Biofertilizer was a strategy which we began to work on in the 1980s, as far as is concerned. Till now, we have not been able to put a sound policy on biofertilizers in place. Similarly, on integrated farming system, which I will come into the third part, and so the kind of agriculture challenges that we face, the roadmaps have been delayed. A nationwide campaign will be rolled out. This is 4 days ago. We announced through ICR, Indian Council of Agriculture Research Institute, through a program called Mera Gaon, Mera Gaurav. Everything is Gaurav at the moment. But we can't be proud of the strategy that we have followed. Gaurav is actually every day affected. We've been told it was a hellhole by Trump. Integrating awareness, input support, and knowledge dissemination at the grassroots is very, very important. And I wish that they have decided a target of reducing chemical fertilizer use by 25% by 2030. I think a possible goal. It can be achieved, but it would require a huge mobilization of peasant cooperation, local bio-input resource center being built, and all the other stakeholders would have to contribute, state agriculture universities, private sectors included. Biofertilizers have to work on the basis of local strains. They are very sensitive to climate changes and various heat, temperature, and so on, etc. So this has been a challenge in the case of biofertilizer, but even biofertilizer will play only a supplementary role. What we need is a integrated farming system approach where we have a reduction in very soil, nutrients is better managed in a rational manner in IFS. Thank you very much. We will come to the part 3 in the next round. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Dinesh ji. I think that was a really excellent and in-depth presentation on how we should be looking at fertilizer as a strategic sector. But you also traced how we have moved from self-sufficiency to import dependence because of what you said, privatization, globalization, and liberalization. So we will definitely come back to you in the next part to understand what are the pathways forward and how we can, although you have highlighted in detail how we can overcome these challenges. But now we will move on to Subhash Chandra Garg's video. As I mentioned in the beginning, unfortunately, he had a personal emergency, so he is not able to join us, but we were able to record him in the morning. So we'll briefly hear from him on the energy sector before we move on to Siddharth. And since Siddharth's topic is on fossil fuels, energy sector, and militarization, this would also create a good backdrop to his discussion. So, Anjali, if you could please play the conversation. So, Subhashji, we are exactly today 3 months into the war, and the crux of the discussion globally has been on the issue of energy security. Countries, particularly in Asia, due to their reliance on Gulf oil and gas imports, have been impacted more than other regions. Within the context of India, if in your opening remarks, you could please provide us with an overview of what is India's current energy landscape, as well as speak about its structural vulnerability due to high import dependence of oil and gas. As well, what are the long-term impacts for the economy and the broader implication on people in terms of rising costs, inflation, etc. So please, Subhashji.
Thank you, Ashmi. I think you have so many very important aspects built into your questions. So let me try to respond in the short time in which I have. So, India energy is a high state of vulnerability and insecurity. You may sort of capture it in one sort of way. So, when Mr. Narendra Modi took over in 2014, at that time, India's import dependence for oil was about 67% of the total consumption in the country. He vowed, he said that we will reduce it to much less, about 4 5% at least, if not more. After 11 years, today our sort of dependence is more than 85%. So, despite his best efforts, despite his real intentions, India's dependence on oil import is actually increasing. Why is this so? There are very clear reasons. Our domestic production of oil has been consistently going down for last 15 years, having reached at about 35, 37 million tons in a year. It's, I think, down to about 22, 23 million tons every year. One statistics in the core sector, which tells you that there is a reduction in the domestic production of oil, is this one, that the domestic production of oil is going down. This is despite many things. There have been new exploration policies, new contracts, and none of them seems to have made any difference. There was some difference earlier until in the first decade or so, when the ONGC blocks were given to the Cairns and others, which led to some increase, a good increase, but that has also been sort of now wavered off. Energy dependence in terms of oil is complete strangulation over our neck, so to say, as far as India is concerned. There are alternatives. There are two more major alternatives to the oil, not perfect alternatives, but substantially good ones. One is that you go for the coal, the use of more and more coal. And coal India is quite abundant, though it has a low quality coal, but still the reserves are, and the reservoirs of the coal, so to say, are much more than what India would need for next 50 to 100 years. So you may use coal, but the coal is grossly polluting, very inefficient. It makes the life miserable. How do you dispose of the ashes and other contents, the land, many other things, which sulfur, which come along with it, creates more problem. That's why globally it is going down. Its use is going down. There's been a major debate about phase out versus phase down. The world wants to phase out coal. India tried and made everyone agree that you can go for the phase down policy, which required that you, over a period of time, slowly, you start reducing your use of coal. India has in the last 5-7 years announced new coal plants, but they are not going to make much difference, and none of them has come to. And that, as I said, the polluting coal is going to. It's not a solution for our energy problems or energy security, but it may provide some palliative, some safety valve for some time, but nothing of that. The second most interesting and productive alternative is to go for solar and wind energy. Fortunately, India is so abundant in the solar insulation, and also wind regime is very good. So there are studies which tell you that India's solar and wind potential can take care of its entire energy requirement, even if it is increasing at about 5 to 10% a year. Um, and solar is cheap, modular, very easy to sort of install. So is the wind, but solar is the big brother in this space, and it can make enormous amount of difference in a short bit of time. The catch there is that India doesn't have much of the solar cells, wafers, cells, and the module making capacity. It doesn't have technology. The technology is the real spoiler. The technology is all in the hands of Chinese today, and India imports most of the cells and the modules which it uses. Even if it is going for some of the wafers and silicon kind of technologies, that also will require basic technologies to be imported at least. So the stranglehold here is how to deal with the Chinese. You have two basic choices. Either you allow them to invest, their companies to sort of invest in India, make cells, modules, wafers, everything into this space and use their technology, and then you can use it for sort of expanding the solar capacity here. Or the other choice is that you keep on importing. Importing is very costly. And that is where I think we have $100 billion deficit with China, because we are importing most rather than allowing. We don't allow them to invest. In this space, what has come out from the West Asia is a very major reminder that your problem is not solvable for some of the fundamental natural reasons, and more of your own policy constructs. I mean, if you don't go for the solar and the wind the way you could have gone, then your problem is compounded. And as you see in the West Asia situation today, the Americans now have blockaded the Strait of Hormuz, which has made the Strait of Hormuz practically unusable for everyone in this space. So we have 20% of oil coming from there. We have a lot of gas coming from there. And in case, as it stands now, you can't get the oil and the gas out of the Strait of Hormuz, the energy crisis is going to worsen further. And that brings me to the point that we have held it sort of, as far as consumers are concerned, they have been protected so far largely because of the reason that there are elections. The cost is mounting up, and cost has to be shared by the three players in the system. Either the consumers bear it, or the government bears it by way of reducing the taxes or providing subsidies, or the oil companies do it. Somebody has to bear the cost, or you share it. There is no way you can avoid the cost. And with crude rising to $110 per barrel, and India's basket becoming much more costlier, this is a killing burden. This is a very bad burden. It cannot be avoided. So I see very quickly, maybe 15 days from now, maybe 1.5 months, whenever it suits politically, there has to be an increase in consumer price, and that's not necessarily bad. You have to recover the price which you pay for the petrol and making petrol and the diesel, or the aviation fuel for that matter. You can cushion that to some extent, but you can't take on, because the government would go bankrupt. But they already reduced the excise duties by about 50%. And they can have only limited more space. Otherwise, it will kill our roads program. It will kill our other programs, because that is the revenue which goes into building roads, railways, and other infrastructure. So if you provide subsidies, then you don't have a space for that as well. Oil companies cannot in any case bear. So what I see is that this West Asia crisis should actually be treated as a reminder that we have strong long-term, very drastic vulnerabilities and insecurities. We have to find long-term solutions. Ethanol is not a solution. Ethanol is for petrol. Petrol is only 20% of our energy, sort of petroleum products consumption, not energy. And that even if you, and that has its own implications there. So it's a limited, and if we go more and more for ethanol, we'll create problems in agriculture. Because agriculture, the water use is India's bane there, India's vulnerability. So I think the only solution is to go for solar and the wind. Take a policy choice, make a policy choice that 25 years from now we will have not less than 75% of our power, not the installed capacity, coming from the solar and wind. That is what the nation is. And then you go after adopting necessary policies in the programs for that. You can only solve it in the long term, not in the short. Thank you.
Following up on some of the things that you've already raised, but maybe if we can just explore that a bit in depth. My first question would be, even if the strait opens up, let's say immediately, how long would it take for the supply to reach to pre-conflict conditions, and what does that look like in the long term for India? Because it's a matter of not just a few weeks, it could possibly take months. So if you could comment a little bit on that. And also, from your position within government, if you could perhaps explain in a little bit more detail cost to exchequer currently, and how much more is India's energy import bill increasing by, and what have been similar situations, like there was oil disruption even during the Ukraine war. So what was India's strategy during that period in terms of how did they deal with what you're saying, the cost sharing, whether it was mainly borne by the government, or was it borne by the people or oil companies? So what has been the previous experience?
So thank you. I think both the questions, let me take one by one. On the Strait of Hormuz opening, I don't see an immediate opening taking place, because the Americans have also discovered that they can pressurize Iran massively by cutting off the Strait of Hormuz, because they are not able to sell their oil, but they are not able to get the imports from the rest of the world for their own on food and other kind of things. So they have realized that this is a greater tool. This is a big, much more powerful tool. Its downside is that it also hurts the American allies in the system, whether it's the Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain, and others. They are or Qatar. They are also affected. So they would put pressure on Americans to do it, to open it as early as possible. But the intransigence or the lack of progress in at least agreeing to what the minimum objective of the Americans is, that you commit not to build a nuclear weapon there and hand over this, which Iran in its latest proposal has also said that we will discuss the nuclear after 2 months after the strait is opened. So I don't see this getting resolved very soon. But assuming for a minute, to take your question, that it gets opened, then there are the questions which arises relating to what is the damage to the gas networks, what is the damage to the oil, and what is the fact that the much of the oil has been lost in a way because you've not produced and you've not transported. So there are various estimates that about 10 million barrels per day is the oil loss which is currently happening on an average. So it will take time. Qatar did say that the gas networks might take about 1 to 3 years for getting very normal. Others will also take time. But if we assume, and I don't know, we'll have to also factor in the implications of UAE walking out of the OPEC, which may turn into a kind of competition for supplies. If that takes place, that happens, that's good for the world in the sense that the energy prices, there are many imponderables, many factors at play. But on the whole, on an average, if you take it that if the Gulf opens today, maybe in 2 months' time, you would see the normal supplies from the Middle East getting restored. So that's your first question to my mind. The other question about the fiscal math for this for it, we have primarily the central government earns through. By the way, I'm not in the government any longer, so I left the government 6 years back, but I do it sitting outside as an independent observer. The excise duty is roughly about 4 lakh crore annual. This year there has been little more. For what reasons we don't know, but we'll take it 4 lakh crores as 4 lakh crores as the average revenue which comes from the excise. The government reduced the special excise duty by 10 rupees on both diesel and petrol, which to my mind, the calculation suggests that about 1.6, 1.7 trillion for a year, lakh crore for a year, roughly about 40% of the excise duty is gone for a year, right? It's very unlikely that the oil prices globally will come down. So I don't think there would be any opportunity available, at least in 26, 27, for the government to restore the excise duty. There might actually be pressure for cutting it down further. I don't think they have the ability to cut down, because much of the what is remaining goes for the road construction program, railways, and other things. But supposing they have this, because the politics works very differently, this government has been reluctant to increase the prices for the consumers. Fertilizer prices have not been raised for n number of years. Food has been actually made. You don't even charge 1 rupees, 2 rupees, or 3 rupees. You made it free. So I think the government would be quite reluctant to increase the prices to the last extent possible. But that in the case of oil products is not very far off. So I see in next 2 months the government increasing the diesel and allowing the oil companies to raise the diesel price and the petrol price by at least about 10 rupees per liter. But that is in lieu of what the government would do from. So government, I don't think at this, if the situation worsens, the oil companies, there are some numbers which the government is been putting out that on diesel today, their under recoveries is about 100 rupees a liter. I find this very high, but that is what the government has officially put it out. If that is the kind of loss which the oil companies are incurring, even a 10 rupees or 15 rupees increase is not going to make much difference. So oil companies, to my mind, for next 1 to 2 years are looking at a destruction of balance sheets. So very difficult situation fiscally is staring the government as we go. But there is no option if the situation continues for passing on at least a part burden of the increase to consumers.
Thank you so much, Subhash. So I have one last question.
Okay.
So you and other people have actually argued that India remains overexposed to West Asia in terms of their energy imports, and there's a need for diversification of oil import destinations. But what do you make of just before the war started? We had a White House order which said that India's reduction in tariffs are actually linked to their commitment to not buy oil from Russia. So when India is exposed to such external pressures, what do you make in terms of how the future of this diversification is possible? So if you could comment a little bit on the energy sovereignty of India and its political choices, therefore.
This is very unfortunate. I don't know why we as a nation have got boxed in such difficult situations. There is no justification whatsoever to obey or abide by the American commands in this, whatever be the consequences. I think this surrender, this meek acceptance of the American hegemony conditions is terribly bad for that. Diversification of supplies. One, it's basically two aspects there. One is to get physical supplies, whatever be the price. So if you have the need for that much, you need to buy. So that is one aspect. For that, I think if India wriggles out or just disowns this American pressure and say that we will secure the supplies from anywhere we like, I think that is that bluff need to be called, and that will restore the respect for India's own sovereignty and its ability to secure its energy security. About the price, which was the real motivation in last 1 year, when the Russian oil was available at much lesser price than the global prices, etc. I think that situation is gone. Even Russian oil is not available at any cheaper rate now, because if the global supplies are lesser than the global demand, so why would Russians sail? So the question of securing cheaper supplies of oil is not relevant any longer to my mind. The question is only to secure the supplies you need for your meeting your demand. And for that, I think India should call off this bluff of the US and restore or assume or get back its own sovereignty to deal with the way they like. I think that situation must not continue.
Okay, Subhashji, thank you so much.
Thank you.
So I think one point that both Subhashji and Dineshji are making is that the war has only highlighted what are structural weaknesses that are already existing in both the energy and fertilizer sector. And Dineshji would also like to come back to you with regard to the subsidy bill and who bears the cost of subsidy is a point Subhash also raised. So we can maybe come back to that in the Q&A session. Now I would like to move on. Now I would like to move on to Siddharth. So, Siddharth, I would now, could you please, I would like to now invite you to speak on what are the links between fossil fuels and militarization, how energy supply chains enable and sustain military operations. And also, if you could speak about how India and Indian businesses are involved in sustaining what is Israel's war economy, which is also a large part of the government's current geopolitical stance of silence towards both Palestine and Iran. So if you could comment on some of these issues, please.
Thanks, Asmi. So just as a sort of clarification in the start, I'm not somebody who does research on energy. So obviously, in comparison to the speakers before me, this is going to be a broader sort of context on energy supply chains. And it comes particularly in sort of action-oriented research over the last 2.5 years in the context of the genocide, but then also its continuation into the Iran war. And it sort of maybe takes a sort of proactive response to what's happening as a way to think about India, energy, and sort of militarization. And so that's sort of where I will be speaking from. And I think listening to the other speakers, it obviously like ties into the depth of sort of issues that India has of its own. And then if you add the element of militarization and the climate crisis with the country burning at the moment, where does that leave us with some of these contradictions, but also where we think about it? And if there is time in the second round, I'll sort of just come back to 4 things that are happening across the world right now, which I think would be helpful to just have a discussion around, especially I see that in the participants, there's so many people who are very knowledgeable in all of those things. So, comments even from people would be really helpful to sort of talk about. I think one of the things that has become quite clear during the sort of Israel genocide on Palestine is that military supply chains and the fossil fuel industry are deeply linked. Now, that might be very specifically to the American sort of military industrial complex and Israel. But I think given India's growing relationship to both of those countries, it is sort of something that we should be keeping an eye out for. So I'm going to focus on that in a way and talk about it. And what has become quite clear is that what we think about as being civilian ports, civilian supply lines, companies that are pretty innocuous sounding as traders or oil marketers, have come to be recognized as being deeply embedded in the war and the genocide, and not just sort of embedded as being sort of facilitators, but beyond that, is sort of also opportunistically driving their own profits through sort of this role that they play in the fossil fuel industry. Now, Center for Financial Accountability had done sort of a study on the profits from genocide. And, on energy, there was just a small footnote on the Indian Oil Corporation and Finergy. And so I think, again, there aren't deep ties as this presentation will show, but there are things that we can start thinking about where this relationship could be going. And so, in the last 20 years, India has sort of emerged as a net exporter of refined fuels. And, using Kepler data, if you look at this from 2020, the Jamnagar refinery has directly supplied the most amount of diesel, gasoline, and jet fuel to the Eilat Ashkelon terminal, which is in Israel. 42 shipments over a 3-year period, when since 7th October, shipments haven't gone because of geopolitical reasons. But there is trade that has happened of sort of diesel, gasoline fuels, and there's a double sort of use there because Reliance is also a trader. It uses facilities in Ashkelon port to sort of trade refined fuels into the Mediterranean region. But it could also be supplying into Israel's energy grid. And particularly in the case of Israel, I think this is something for us to think about, which is that the civilian use and the military use are impossible to sort of differentiate, and they sit with each other. And then even beyond the Middle East, so the first story is of course from 2009 when Reliance just went international as a trader, and it started to commission fuel storages which continue until now. Then in 2024, Vitol, which is the world's largest oil trader, and Gas India Limited sort of signed a deal to bring LNG into it. Reliance then went to the US, and this is largely to sort of purify the Permian Basin shale oil that's coming out, and there's a huge expansion that has happened of that as well. And then, of course, the capture of Maduro, and Vitol again becomes the first company that goes in, and Venezuelan oil starts coming to India. And so then even beyond the Middle East, if we start looking at sort of these small stories of energy trade happening with India, what does it tell us on relationships to different kinds? So obviously the US-India relationship and particularly refined fuels out of America, there's deep linkages of that to American supply bases, to the Department of Defense, to Israel in itself, to sort of NATO bases. What does it say about, like Dinesh was saying, about not having a comment on the Ayatollah, but also like, this massive capture of a state head and no word on that. And the first thing that happens is Vitol comes to India and we start receiving oil from there. And then, of course, again, the Gas India Limited, which had a long precursor. This is, of course, Australian gas, but Vitol is also the dealer of Israeli gas in occupied Palestinians' waters. And so there's a deep embedding with certain actors and certain sort of geopolitical interests that's happening. And I think it's well worth for us to think about what that means. Now, obviously, this is a known fact, the American military-industrial complex in itself, which is a huge consumer, and the links between militarism and fossil fuel are very deeply embedded there. And I think with the NATO bloc sort of now ramping up production of arms, etc., for a rearmament that's happening in the European Union, you're going to see more and more investment that's happening. It is again something for us to think about in the Indian context as well. And then, of course, if you just look at the war emissions, so, there was this group of scientists who came out with how do we measure the emissions of war. And so looking at supply chains, post-conflict, pre-conflict. And, if you look at, that's 33 million tons of CO2, which is roughly the entire emissions for a year for a few countries put together. But, bombing and reconnaissance flights took 30% of the emissions. And all of that fuel is delivered from abroad. US weapons delivery flights, just the supply chains of getting arms to be used on people, took up another 21%. And then the actually artillery and bombs that were used took up another 19%. So almost 50% just comes from arms and supplying those arms, which is sort of, again, just a thought into the embeddedness of carbon emissions, both in the manufacturing and movement of weaponry and weapon system. And given India-Israel's ties, it's something for us to think about. But, Rajshekhar's article, which came out in the Polis Project recently on looking at sort of the militarization of the paramilitary forces and state police forces and this ramping up of production, I think it's something, again, that delves and sits with the Indian context quite well, which is what are the climate costs of going down this route of sort of the defense industry. Now, of the energy matrix that goes into Israel, oil and coal continue to be imported. Until 20 years ago, the entire energy matrix was oil and coal, but then it discovered LNG off occupied Palestinians' waters, and it has been using that domestically, but also with gas pipelines to Jordan and Egypt, and then onwards to the European Union and beyond as well. And there's more deals with Greece, America, Cyprus, and the sort of 3+1 energy strategies that are happening there, very close to energy security and militarization in the Eastern Mediterranean region. And one of the things, of course, that in Israel is almost impossible to discern is that there isn't a difference between civilian use and military use. And so oil and coal that end up going to the country and are imported overseas are deeply embedded in the use of tanks, the use of planes, the use of coal for AI, surveillance systems, data backups that are increasingly tied to sort of the war machine. And so one of the things that has really emerged is just how little we know about the transparency of energy systems that leave sort of from the world's mines and oil fields and reach Israel through different actors. And so I think it has revealed a facet of the use of energy and militarism being so close in this context. And obviously, as this has expanded out to Lebanon and then onwards to Iran, it's a similar sort of base. Nothing has changed on the war on Iran other than sort of Israeli planes bombing Lebanon, the Israeli planes and the Iron Dome sort of bombing against Iran, and then the US Central Command operating out of Mediterranean bases in Greece, Italy, Spain. and beyond, and the energy supply systems that go with them and the players who accompany them and allow them for this war to keep continuing. Obviously, LNG, this is just to sort of say that, the entire LNG exports that happen out of Israel happen on stolen Palestinian waters. And if you remember in the last month when there was relentless bombing for 10 hours, Israel redrew a line into Lebanon and then also has now claimed the Lebanese gas field for production of LNG. And that LNG, of course, is into the European Union and things like that. So there's work ongoing there as well, which is to say, what does it mean for Russian dependency to be reduced through sanctions, etc., and for the European Union to import gas from Israel, which is sort of taken from occupied Palestinian waters. And interestingly, of course, this was just yesterday that BP has shown astronomical profits over the last 3 to 4 months, ever since this energy crisis has gone up. Vitol, again, which is the world's largest oil trader, has recorded record profits and traded more oil ever than before. And then, of course, US shale oil production has reached its peak from when they discovered the oil and started drilling. And so given that BP, Vitol, and American shale oil are all sort of becoming linked to Indian refiners and India's role, it's sort of not to say that, India is deeply embedded in the war on Israel through the energy front, but it does sort of talk about energy sovereignty, sort of the role of the firm and states coming to closer, these geopolitical sort of alliances, and also the role of key traders mixing hand. And here, Vitol is particularly important. I can come back to it in the second arm. And just to wind up my presentation, I wanted to talk about 4 things that are happening across the world in which there has been quite an absence from India broadly. And the first of that is that, there are new alliances and a renewed multilateralism that is happening. Here, the Hague Group that was formed 2 years ago, specifically in the context of Palestine, under the ambit to uphold UN international law is one. But starting in Colombia on the 1st of May, is sort of a new international economic order, another conference that's happening. And Colombia is an interesting place because they were the ones who imposed an oil embargo from below, a coal embargo from below, and have since followed up on this question of energy sovereignty, moving towards renewable, supporting Palestine through a coal embargo, and then having progressive policies. And so they've become a world leader in this kind of multilateralism. The Santa Marta conference, which is ongoing, and today is the last day, very centrally has acknowledged the point of fossil fuels, militarism, and the climate crisis. So to some friends who are there is ongoing acknowledgement of the centrality of sort of bringing authoritarianism, American imperialism, war, and the climate together. Defense spending and accountability. And so there's a lot of effort now directly going towards fossil fuels and war spending. We've had war spending from before. So Transnational Institute, the GD Coms, the Swedish sort of base provide a lot of data, but now fossil fuels and how they are being reviewed is also coming in. And then sort of bringing traceability to fossil fuel exports and their use in terms of their end use in war, similar as it applies to arms, is something that's a growing demand as well. And then, of course, there has been sort of transnational solidarities from below. So the contradictions between indigenous communities and oil workers, between oil workers and dock workers, so some of these experiences have really built alliances that have been able to tackle supply chains which transcend borders. And it's sort of learning to think about how they are also making the link between wages, weapons, the climate crisis, and these sort of new kinds of coalitions. So I just wanted to contribute in that way to thinking about India's energy crisis and the growing role of defense in the alliance to America and Israel. Of course, happy to take any questions and have a follow-up, but thank you.
Thanks, Siddharth. I think that was an extremely insightful presentation from a perspective of militarization and energy that I don't think people often think about. So in that sense, I feel this was a lot new information for a lot of us. What I would also be interested from hearing from you as we move forward, although you mentioned that the Hague Group is taking initiative, but many countries have actually taken an active stance against Israel and the genocide for 2 years now. So have there been instances of energy embargo to and from Israel that any country has implemented that you can think of. And I also wanted to mention the Adani-owned Haifa port is probably also what's being used for the supply, the import and export of this energy supply. So India and Indian businesses are very much, tied in this war economy.
Sorry, was that a question? You want me to reply now, Asmi, on the embargo front?
Sure. I think you could start with that, and then we'll move on to questions between you and Dinesh ji. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'll put a link in the chat because so 2.5 years ago, there was a group of Palestinians who sort of reached out to the indigenous communities of Colombia, who, with the coal miners, had begun to form a coalition to enforce a coal embargo from below. And a presidential decree was passed in 2024 that was violated by Drummond and Glencore, who are two commodity traders. And then, there was more activism that happened about that. And then Petro sort of issued a presidential decree, sent the naval out, arrested the ships. And then as of August last year, 2025, coal exports have completely stopped. And so the making of this coal embargo is very much tied also to what we see in India now. So the left guerrillas and the PLO used to be very close to each other. But then the right sort of militia and the Mossad and the Israeli forces also became very close to each other. So Colombia's history is also tied to these alliances which have repressed people. And so the coal embargo drove from those kind of sentiments as well from below, which is why I guess it has been effective in terms of holding until now. Though, of course, the tide of the right is rising everywhere. There's elections coming up. So who knows? Next month, maybe Petro won't be there and they're facing 17 cases as well, which is what I was talking about, the ISDS and the Energy Charter Treaty, where states, even when they implement sort of energy embargoes, are sort of at the mercy of corporations to be sued because it makes it really hard for them to enforce this. But yeah, in short, there is one successful example. And there are groups trying to build out on that similar example in South Africa, in Turkey. Turkey has a trade embargo, but it's broken by BP and SOCAR, which are a trader and oil company. Greek shipping corporates are oligarchs have been quite instrumental in breaking the embargo. They have a history of doing it in Rhodesia during the South African apartheid. And so there's a learning and doing thing happening in moving this ahead.
I think a related question to this in the chat has also been that aside from energy, have there been other significant disruptions to Israel in terms of any other capital pathways?
I mean, I think one of the biggest financial dents, of course, has been through the BDS movement, which is the boycott, divest, and sanction movement. But I think one of the bigger things that has happened is pension funds and financial investors pulling investments on pressure. And so the Norwegian sort of national fund, a lot of the UK pensioners, etc., have begun to pull out funding. And I think in terms of financial, those are some of the biggest dents that have happened because they sort of very clearly take large chunks of money out of it. So.
Okay, thanks for that. Now we'll come back to you with some more questions. Now, Dineshji, we'll come back to you. I think you had a third section of your presentation left, which was on the pathways of what looks like self-sufficiency, as well as what are the possible alternatives to fertilizer trade cooperation outside the control of the US. Yeah. If you could just comment on that.
Dinesh,
If you go back to slides, it will help. Otherwise, I can, without slides also, I can do it. Yeah. See, I was pointing out we do need a balanced, approach to the development of soil nutrient management. After all, a chemical fertilizer has also a lot of challenges. And particularly, we've seen that impacting in terms of pollution as well as even climate contribution, GHG from agriculture, which includes, from fertilizers as a source in use, there is a challenge. So we do need to balance use of fertilizers in variety of ways. One of the important ways in which we have always tackled and could have tackled the reduction in nitrogen usage, that is what the source urea provides for, is that legumes which were part of our cropping systems. Today we import pulses, we import lentils from Canada and others, and legumes were moved out of the cropping system in the areas which were intensive, moving to rice wheat crop rotation in Indo-Gangetic Plain, Punjab, Haryana, West UP, and so on, etc. Legumes have to be brought back. Chana used to be very much part of our, cropping system. Pulses can be. Uh, Doing the nitrogen fixation and reduce the requirement of urea. So the way cropping systems are shaped determines also what would be the requirement. There are a variety of other ways in which we can complement chemical fertilizer. Organics are must, at least if you really want to use chemical fertilizers also in a balanced way. People, 30% of organics is almost essential as far as is concerned. Uh, as far as organics are concerned, its sources are many. Right from dung, animal dung to municipal waste, as well as you, as I you look at crop residues. All these are sources of organic manures, which can be complementary and, in fact, make chemical fertilizer usage more effective, whether urea or potash or phosphorus. As far as then, in variety of ways, people are trying to fix phosphorus also through various trees, which have been part of our, traditional farming systems. They can be also brought back in and this particular challenge of balanced fertilizer development has been there with us very, very long. Integrated nutrient management challenge has been very, very long. And the Green Revolution ignored this, and as a result, we are locked into a pathway where from we have to move out. There is a system which has been worked upon within the ICR system called the Integrated Farming Systems approach. If you look at the next slide, please, Asmi. Thank you. In this reduction, because animal husbandry, crop husbandry, as well as agroforestry and aquaculture are all integrated in these models. They have been worked upon for all agro ecosystems in the country. Indian Institute of Farming System Research, Modipuram, is not very far from Delhi. It's 90 kilometers, the headquarter of this particular major program. And this has shown that external input usage can be brought down hugely, including chemical fertilizer and other pesticides and weedicides also can be reduced. And these models have now been developed over 3 decades, and model results are very much available. If you move to the next slide, please, I indicate how the productivity gains also have been computed, calculated from 2012 onwards, and how up to 2022-23 in this particular table, which we show the data for various regions, where everywhere the productivity in terms of rice equivalent, because these are all mixed cropping systems, so you need an indicator for measuring productivity. We see that the productivity is continuously on the rise. So the critique that which many of the conventional, scientific approaches had of that you can't move away from completely the chemical fertilizer and intensive agriculture is the only way, and then they were trying to move us into precision agriculture based on automation, and where again whether it's equipment companies or various other agribusinesses would only have a field day, whereas here there is an alternative where labor round the year gets work, farmers get round the year income in these models, and it's been shown that income increases, work for labor increases. Now, these models have not been supported by the union government. Only 4 state governments at the moment support these models. That is Kerala, Tamil Nadu, Odisha, and Jammu and Kashmir. In fact, they can be the basis for transition, agrarian transition, and reduction in the use of chemical fertilizer included. And this in Punjab, farmers who have tried out actually have shown wonderful results as far as this is concerned. Let's move to the next slide, please, Asmi. Very quickly, we'll try to now alternate pathways. I've indicated that we should reimagine, and with the idea that while national food security is maintained, but at the same time nutritional food sovereignty also, because the diets are diverse everywhere, different kinds of cereals and pulses are and various other fruits, vegetable, horticulture, fish, animal products, all are used, and there is a nutritional diversity challenge which actually is a critical feature of food sovereignty movement. And I think India needs to reimagine its pathway for agriculture, and in the process it will solve its fertilizer problem too. Of course, we got to, whenever we try to solve one problem, other problems can get created simultaneously. Problems have to be sorted out, be of fertilizer reduction or income and employment as far as concerned. You cannot depend only on one sector or 2 sectors. Agriculture would not be able to absorb all the labor, so we do need rural industrialization as well as urban industrialization. And for that, again, I have published recently a piece in Agrarian South on rural industrialization, how it can. And rural industrialization today, when linked to agroecological transformation of farming, actually offers a huge amount of opportunity in rural industrialization. In fact, if it is combined with even solar, wind in a rational manner, and where you don't lose your arable land and common lands, which is happening with the way the green energy and green industrialization are being implemented, we do need to actually step in again, because from April 2026, solar and all these green energy projects have exemptions. These are white category exemptions given by the Ministry of Environment and Forest, but there is a land and water footprint of these technologies, like of any digital, other digital technologies as well. So when you want to actually ensure that land use is also regulated, today only there is a news item in the papers in Hindu, I think, if I recall, there is a opposition to a solar PV system being put on a water body in one of the southern states, as far as this is concerned. So it is the land footprint, water footprint, and is there food can suffer. Food versus fuel debate is a very real debate, and when land use it comes to, so whether we are trying to produce ethanol in order to put down our we reduce our use of crude and petrol and diesel and so on, etc. And every car is required to what is called the E20 program. Ethanol 20 has to be used, but it has consequences for food. So the pathways would require that perspective, of a comprehensive nature of systemic and structural change and transformation to solve all problems in a manner that the trade-offs are taken care of and competing uses are regulated and competing challenges and impacts are controlled. I'll move to the last slide yeah, it's a summary of the argument. To me, war is becoming an alibi for a neoliberal path to de-risking trade. So FTAs are being signed. Trade-driven agriculture is being imposed. They want us to export our agriculture. Green revolution, with all its fault, was for national food security, and we did not export. We did not use it for export, unlike Africa. Import dependence has been outcome of the liberalization, privatization, globalization path, which was the trade-driven path. We opened our economy and made the economy trade-driven. It cannot be anymore our path anymore. Lessons are very clear. Energy independence is critical to strategic autonomy. Political and economic independence are associated with it. Real self-reliance is national autonomy, where people's needs are and democratic requirements are met. In the part two, I would argue that, and as I've already made the point as a part of even the part one, that the LPG route, the liberalization, privatization, globalization route, was a low road to capitalism. It actually depended on cost competitiveness rather than on systemic and structural sustainability. Viksit Bharat again is built on the basis of cost competitiveness, is make in India for the rest of the world market. And we know whether it is in semiconductors or in any other area, we are using that particular strategy, and data centers and so on, etc. The huge amount of water and land footprint is going to be there of that. We got to expose and demystify these Viksit Bharat projects of the kind that we're seeing. The detours in path formation for food security need to be valued, and livelihood sovereignty for diverse IFS integrated farming systems approach would meet that particular thing. Reimagining policy path for agriculture would require and the balanced energy material portfolio, and would require us to use rural industrialization as a pathway complementary to urban industrialization. Rural industrialization is a real possibility, and which is a biomass-based path. You use regenerate biomass as well as continuously, then process it, value and do value addition to it in a manner that it meets various local industrial needs as well as the national needs. So building, and there's a whole paper on that which I've written, that what all is possible in the rural industrialization. So it's not only the urban industrialization in various clusters and centers that need to be carried out. You can generate local employment, and that goes very well with the integrated farming systems and agroecological approaches. So to cut the story short, the peasants and worker-based economy is our pathway, is our alternative. And in that, you have to provide space for biomass and animal wealth in land use. Harish Damodran, for example, wrote, and some friends in Global Nitrogen Group wrote that, we can't go back to actually animals being used in agriculture, which I don't think is the case. Animals can be, bullocks can be used again, cows and other animals, animal sheds can be created, as long as balanced uses are there. You don't scale up in a manner that only one kind of homogenized pathway is used anywhere and everywhere. Then you have the possibility of balance being maintained, as well as climate, decarbonization, various other challenges of employment and livelihoods also would get simultaneously taken care of. Where I will close, so the solution to, a challenge that the war has, which exposed only, it was there always, is a new path to a development which Viksit Bharat does not envisage, and we hope this series of meetings, that online meetings which CFA is organizing, this issue can continuously be brought up in different ways, that what are alternative to the Viksit Bharat pathways. Thank you very much. Let me take a pause here and put closer to the argument. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Dinesh. Just to continue on what you were saying, to what extent are the government policies currently in line with what you're describing as this agroecology approach, with their own fertilizer production policies?
It's very far away. They are not at all, as I told you, that a balanced development of soil nutrients availability requires several components to be simultaneously developed. That's not the case. As I pointed out in one nation, one fertilizer program of Department of Fertilizer launched in October 2022 actually has handed over the sale and application of fertilizer and soil nutrients to corporate retail units. There's a study which I'm completing, that who all have taken over these retail units. There are 3 lakh point 26,000 retail units, as far as from where soil testing is also taking place, and the fertilizers are also sold. They won't be able to, as I pointed out in the Karnal Panipat study that which we did, that they were not actually capable of even, or not wanting to have even any interest in scientific application of fertilizer. So if fertilizer has to be brought, use cannot be deregulated, production cannot be deregulated. I disagree with the neoliberal group which continuously asks that you de-risk subsidy bill. You asked Asmi the question, how subsidy bill? The subsidy bill is a consequence of the way we tried putting all eggs in one basket, and we became import dependent. You remember that in not only the case of fertilizer, Enron plant, which was built on again, imported fuel, and how it met its ill fate. And we just can't, we are a large country. For our food security and energy security, we just can't afford to be dependent. Subsidy is there because a huge foreign exchange costs. And we have to pay for that both through exports as well as through subsidy, because the cost continues to increase. And as a result, and this I've given the figures and how the costs have been rising, foreign exchange outflows have been rising, subsidy bill has been rising. If it is to be contained, the mantra is self-reliance matters, energy independence matters, not all bags in one basket, use different alternate pathways, have a balanced energy and food and agricultural development. I don't even believe that the 100% renewable energy is possible. I'm one of those persons. I think we need to use variety of components of and sources of energy to actually achieve challenge of our climate, even as far as it's concerned. Renewable energy technologies have their own footprint as far as it's concerned. And not everything can be taken care of through only solar. And totally import dependent. Our PVs we are importing them. Batteries, we are importing them. So I think when we talk of a policy, we must talk of a policy in a comprehensive, systemic way where all different kinds of impacts are taken care of. This is my understanding. So subsidy containing, or it is containing of dependence, all require a very balanced energy and food sector development. Thank you.
I think I really like the point you made that high subsidy bills are essentially a political choice and a consequence of the policies of liberalization, globalization, etc. So I think that point is really well taken. One of the questions that's come from the audience is if you could comment on how the recent push of the government towards coal gasification, if you could comment on that, which has been justified as a process of self-reliance and Indianization. So indigenization, sorry. Yeah.
See, if you see my slide, I see that we don't have that much oil and gas. We have coal. We started working on coal. In fact, the British believed that the Indian coals can't be used for power stations. They can't be used for the steel plants. And we worked at Central Fuel Research Institute, Dhanbad, which was one of my dissertation, where we began to look at actually how Indian coals, which have high ash, can be used. British even believed that the Indian buffalo milk cannot be used. British scientists had all kinds of prejudices and biases as far as this concerned. Science was advanced as a part of decolonization process. And I see the usage of coal gasification far better than burning coal directly, which is more polluting, which is more emissions. Whereas with the coal gasification, you can reduce emissions also. And so I'm not saying scale up in a manner that everywhere only coal gasification is used. No, rather it's implied in my pathway, and it's in a slide where I also have indicated very clearly. Decarbonization equally has to be taken as an important pathway. You don't start replicating everywhere coal gasification, where absolutely where you have existing plants which are dependent on liquefied natural gas imported, you shift them to coal gasification. They're all sitting on the pit heads or very near the pit heads as far as are concerned. So coal gasification is a way to reduce import dependence as far as it's concerned, and this is how I see it as. And I think I'm not saying that coal gasification solves all our problems. Now forget about pulses. You forget about Indian integrated farming system. Forget about biofertilizer. No, not at all. Similarly, like I take a point with regard to the energy also, that it can't be renewable energy alone. It has to be many sources of energy, and 100% is, to me, neither coal nor nuclear nor anything is acceptable. I think we need a very different energy policy of 1965 as well as 70s. We should go back to some of those debates. T.L. Shankar and others who were at that time very much involved in this particular effort. Read those reports. India is an energy deficient country. India has to manage energy in a very manner. And unfortunately, energy, we thought we could import it because it was cheaper. Why was it cheaper? Because the Americans were dominating West Asia. Americans could keep them under the, as a thumb. But today, like UAE yesterday or today has come out of the OPEC as far as is concerned, how Saudi Arabia and all will deal with it. Uncertainty will continue to be built. Cheap energy, cheap fuel, cheap food is just not possibility. Now, post-growth possibilities, etc., all have to be incorporated into the pathways as far as is concerned. Then only you can deal with even the military-industrial complex, because they need more and more capital accumulation. They need military-industrial complex also for that reason. Fossil fuels are intertwined, as Siddharth was saying rightly. Palestine crisis and fossil fuel crisis are not very two separate. If you talk to Palestinians or people in West Asia, the progressive people, they will tell you this, that these are all interlinked problems. I completely agree with Siddharth that India is in the bag of Israel and United States. It's in pity. We should condemn it in every possible way. There is no other sentiment that I can express it publicly in this particular webinar. Yes, we must stop this support to Israel in every possible manner. They're responsible for genocide. And I think a clear, loud message should go. As a result, don't become dependent on them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dinesh ji. I think keeping in mind the time, just one last concluding question that we have in the chat for Siddharth. So, Siddharth, the question is that India's position has historically shifted with respect to who we choose to be friends with. Indian companies have been Israel's largest defense contractors between 2019 and 24. We are also seeing that India's economy is being badly hurt by instability in the very region where these weapons are used for. So it appears India is simultaneously equipping the war and paying the price for it. And who within India actually benefits from this arrangement, and who bears the cost?
I mean, I think one of the things that is happening quite clearly across the world is that I think we started 2 years ago with saying we are in solidarity with Palestine. And I think what doing work for Palestine has shown us that actually we need to be more in solidarity with ourselves, because everything that culminates in Palestine starts in places where we see struggle. And so I think that has become the organizing sort of principle for a lot of groups as well. So as I was talking about fossil fuel and military supply chains, right? Like now, I think production sites, their shipping sites, logistic warehouses, maritime routes, shipping insurers, ports, these are all becoming sites where people are organizing for Palestine, but in solidarity for themselves. And so to just give an example, for example, the dock workers in Italy from the USB, which has been one of the biggest, they've blocked multiple shipments. They've had a strong post-Palestinian, pro-Palestinian stance. They now have dock workers do not work for war banner. And one of the things that they write is that if rearmament does not stop, wages will not rise. And so I think like that is quite clearly happening. How we articulate that in the Indian context, I think, is something that we, again, all of us are thinking about as well. I think Rajshekhar's report, again, is a very important start to thinking about that in terms of the number of clusters, right? So it's not just the Adanis and Ambanis that we've been thinking about, right? So the UP clusters, the Pune cluster, the Hyderabad cluster. And from what we know, India is increasingly having that dual role, which is like what it does in weapons deals with Israel is not high tech. They know the Indians are smart enough to pick up the tech. And so it is low value assembly of arms, ammunitions, and things like that. And we also know these kind of similar things are being used in Bastar and central India. And of course, there's the energy nexus there as well with coal mining, etc. And so I think like all of us need to, maybe there's a follow-up webinar that we do on this, which is essentially on this question that in standing in solidarity with Palestine, what is the solidarity that we need to build here on the military-industrial complex that's spawning? And what are the ways that we do it in sort of all of these larger questions? So I think that's the answer I have. We know what's happening, but I think it's also important for more than the Ambani and Adani that we look deeper into the structural transformations that are happening as well with manufacturing towards weapons, what it means for defense allocations, what that means for public accountability, what that means for climate, food. These are so interlinked. And this is the moment where those interlinkages are becoming so clear. And so there is also the potential for both transnational, but also wide sectoral alliances and solidarities to be built. So that's where I would sort of say is where our route ahead lies.
Thanks, Siddharth. Actually, as you were speaking, I was reminded, a few years ago, there was a protest that happened in the UK, which actually put up against military, the UK and military, Israel's military alliance. But the poster actually said something like tested in Kashmir, used in Palestine, or the other way around. So, the connectedness of oppressive networks has also been continuing. So you're absolutely right. I think it's time to kind of see how, as civil society, where we stand, how can we challenge these oppressive networks. So thank you so much. I think we will end our webinar here. Thank you so much to the speakers for giving your time. I think we've gone on for almost an hour and 40 minutes. And now I'll just hand over to Anjali to conclude the session. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much to all the speakers and to Asmi for moderating the session. Please have a look at the chat. We will be happy to share all the links to the reports, including Professor Dinesh's presentation. Please keep following on the social media. CFA keeps posting about whatever upcoming webinars are coming. And yeah, keep in touch. Thanks so much. On behalf of CFA, to all the speakers, moderators, and all those who've been present here for such a long time. Thanks. Thanks a lot.